Let's get analysis on the Israel-Hamas conflict, and for that we're joined via Teams by international relations scholar Dr. Charles Sinkala. Dr. Sinkala, a good morning to you. I think we both watched that, and it was a very difficult conversation to watch. But let's unpack it a little bit right now. Israel says that it will not engage in any talks until it has dealt with Hamas. What do you make of that?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, indeed, it is quite unfortunate that you can see the sentiments from the high government official of Israel. And I think in terms of the conflicts, these are the challenges that we are having for parties into conflict to adjust to the level of understanding. I think what we can pick out from that interview significantly is that, they are failing to understand that, there's two separate parties between Palestine, the state of Palestine, and as well as the terrorist group, the Hamas. If we have to deal with this, we need to understand and respect the sovereignty of a Palestine state. And I think some engagement has to be engaged on the government level. The Hamas cannot be negotiated with. Yes, I do agree, because it's a terrorist group. And negotiating with the terrorist group is agreeing to work with the terrorists. I remember very well in South Africa, hence we have seen that South African government and the people of South Africa were completely detached from Umkhonto weSizwe, who were regarded as a terrorist group during the fight for freedom during the apartheid times. But this significantly also teaches us that this is why the Umkhonto weSizwe could not be established and continue, because their purpose ended. And in doing so, it will be creating an organization within South Africa that might even come back and turn against the government. But Israel, yes, they are part and parcel to this. They need to come down and discuss with the people, not only those who are fighting within the Hamas, carry the flag of Palestine, and they regard every terrorist there that they are Palestine. There are also individual Palestine who would like an end to this. At the end of the day, the people of both two countries are suffering and are being killed every day.
Yeah. Well, hours after that strike on the hospital in Gaza that claimed hundreds of lives, it still remains unclear who's responsible for the bloodiest single incident since the Israel-Hamas conflict began. This is with officials on two sides trading blame. So, I mean, what do you think of that? Who do you think is responsible for the strike on the hospital in Gaza that took close to 500 lives?
Well, it's quite difficult, yes, indeed, to find out unless forensic evidence will be laid in terms of an independent party, not coming from Israel, not coming from Palestine, to find out the share of those shillings, they had to attack on the hospital. Until now, we can't know who fired. There's also other third parties involved who would like the wars to continue. They can fire as a deterrence. For either party to be taken responsible for that, so that it aggrieves the other party. That's also another challenge of war. It is very difficult to see who pointed or who shot to the innocent people. Both two countries, they will point at the enemy because they're in the confrontation of the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit about what international law says about striking a hospital, for instance. I mean, if you look at the situation in Gaza, reports are that up to 30,000 people are finding refuge in hospitals because they're struggling to find places that they consider safe. Let's talk about what the international law says about striking places like hospitals.
Well, the international law is very clear, as well as the Charter of the United Nations. After the passing or the ending of the 1945 world wars, no state shall rise against another state. It is illegal, and I think processes and consequences have precedent. But we're not talking about, on the other side, we're talking about a terrorist organization which hasn't been recognized. Hamas hasn't been recognized as part of the state of Palestine, and as well as Israel is trying to protect itself to fight against that. And, it is very difficult at this stage, for a blame to be taken either on Israel or Palestine. But what we can say that there's always the condemnation in terms of the national law, in terms of the international law, on how countries or states has to engage each other through diplomatic means by not a verbal, which has to be corresponded to the either parties' defense and security in terms of that we're going to strike. And this strike should not be a strike to innocent and unarmed individuals or citizens such as the hospital.
What do you make of how the world is reacting to the strike on the hospital, though? I mean, is the world taking notice of just how serious of a humanitarian crisis this is?
Well, the world is very surprised at this stage, and I think you can also see from the conflicting and different sentiments or perspectives in terms of the wars. Other nations such as Kenya, they are supporting Israel. Other nations such as South Africa are supporting the Palestine and the people of Palestine. So it's very difficult, to react. And others as well, they are going without supporting anyone, and they're calling for the end of war. Even though the two giants are fighting, but we can see the rise in numbers in terms of victims who are being killed. Without any aim of protection from either party of the side. But as the international community, we condemn these wars which are now escalating and they're getting out of hand. We call on the United Nations Security Council to urgently address these issues involving the parties on the government level, not to fire or any other ammunition to civilian passengers, so that they can deal with this in terms of diplomatic means. But I'm sure this has failed. That's why we heard from the interview of Mokwena and the Minister for People and Diaspora from Israel that how did we end up here? And I think the causation and leading to this is the failure by both governments, to meet a certain point of negotiating so that they cannot escalate to war.
Let's talk a little bit about how the region is responding. We've certainly talked about the world. You've got the Arab League essentially saying that they're not going to allow a situation where Palestinians and Gazans are pushed to leave. Our international news editor, Sophie Mokwena, had a discussion as well with the ambassador to Egypt, who essentially made the point that Egypt, where it stands right now, is also not supporting Palestinians and Gazans leaving. Their concern is once they leave, they may not make it back. Is that the right response from the region?
I think the concern should be how can the war be stopped? Trying to push another group of people from a territory that is actually fueling the war, because the people of Palestine and the people of Israel, they have occupied the Gaza Strip for many generations and years. And this is what they do not want to be displaced from that area. I think the ending of the war is reconciling, establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that they can understand both sides' prayers, and if they can be met halfway.
I wonder though if saying that is slightly utopian. I mean, you heard the interview that we played just moments ago of that high-ranking official in Israel, and let's talk about the temperature of that conversation. I mean, the likelihood of a ceasefire, let's be very, very upfront here. How likely is a ceasefire?
Well, we can't see if that tone can be on that level, which means the war is continuing. That tone should have been toned down, and I think we were hoping as a world and as a continent as well that we shall hear the tone being toned down because of the passing days, and now we're going to almost a week in terms of the conflicts and the escalation of military invasion in the Gaza Strip. But that tone alone, it tells a lot of words that we are very far away, in terms of mediating or ending this war.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, you've got the Israeli army saying that humanitarian aid would be made available to Palestinians who evacuate to southern Gaza, but did not provide details of whether or how much aid would be brought into that enclave. I mean, one argues that this puts Palestinians between a rock and a hard place, right? That should they stay, they don't get any aid. If they leave, there's the possibility of aid.
Well, even the Palestinian organization, even the Hamas and the government itself, has been seen to not receive that aid because they don't trust Israel. That aid can come, to destroy them. That aid can come. It's war. You cannot receive aid from your enemies to feed your children. So I think it's a very difficult predicament at this stage until such a time that the parties, the two heads of state, sit down and look at it objectively, not subjectively, then they can allow those corridors to now start concentrating on the victims that are being found in the crossfire.
Yeah, all right, let's leave it there. Of course, so we are also getting news that Jordan has, Joe Biden's visit to Jordan has been cancelled. This, as we know, the US president is set to visit the region to discuss the conflict between Hamas and Israel. But let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. That was Dr. Charles Sinkala, who is international relations scholar.